Mr. President, I rise today to urge my colleagues to join me in opposing the nomination of Debo Adegbile to head the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. The Constitution grants the President the power to nominate individuals to head various agencies and departments, but it falls to us here in the United States Senate to ensure these nominees are worthy of that honor and are ready for that responsibility. I don't make it a practice of opposing nominees. In fact, I generally give the President discretion there. I have voted to give him wide latitude in filling the executive branch with individuals of his choice when I believe that they're qualified. In fact, I've voted along with a minority of Republicans to endorse and confirm a number of the President's nominees. But when it comes to a nominee who lacks the essential qualifications to fill one of these high offices, those of us charged with providing advice and consent cannot remain silent. Unfortunately, this is one of those occasions. Mr. President, it takes more than a law degree from a prestigious school and an impressive resume to head an agency as important as the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice. Most important, I think it takes judgment, and that's something that cannot be measured by test scores or diplomas. It can only be measured over time through someone's actions. If we look at Mr. Adegbile's record, it becomes obvious to me why so many of us here in the Senate and so many around the country, including the Fraternal Order of Police, who have not opposed an executive branch nomination, by the way, in 17 years, are taking a strong stand against this confirmation. First, as some of his colleagues, my colleagues here on the Senate floor have noted, Mr. Adegbile has a history of taking extreme positions on some of our fundamental constitutional rights that I think are out of step with the views of the American people, the judgments of our judiciary, and our nation's history. In the case of Hosanna Tabor versus EEOC, Mr. Adegbile argued that religious institutions do not have the right to hire or fire individuals responsible for conveying a church teachings, a view that if it were to become law would have severely undermined religious liberty. Mr. Adegbile was so out of step with the Constitution on that issue that his view was rejected by the Supreme Court, 9-0, which in today's typical 5-4 split in the Supreme Court is quite an accomplishment. Mr. Adegbile's view of the First Amendment is troubling. So too, though, are his views of the Second Amendment. He has repeatedly asserted that the Second Amendment does not, and I quote, protect an individual's right to keep and bear arms. If Mr. Adegbile had his way, millions of Americans would lose one of their most cherished rights, just like that. Whenever a piece of gun control legislation comes to the floor of this chamber, my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, in fact, often my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, assure us that they will always respect and defend the fundamental right to bear arms. It's unfortunate that despite the words of the Constitution and its interpretation by the Supreme Court, Mr. Adegbile cannot give us those same assurances. And then there's the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal. Abu-Jamal is a murderer. In 1981, he gunned down a police officer named Daniel Faulkner in a Philadelphia street. In an act of unmatched brutality, Abu-Jamal, in front of 4 witnesses, stood over Officer Faulkner as he lay dying and shot him in the face. A mountain of evidence from eyewitness accounts to forensics to his own words make it clear beyond any doubt that Abu-Jamal killed Officer Faulkner that day in December 1981. Still, Abu-Jamal deserved his day in court, just like any other American accused of a crime. He got his day in court. He deserved competent counsel. He got that too. He deserved an opportunity to appeal, and he got it. In fact, activists turned it from a criminal matter, an issue of justice, into a political cause, so he received some of the best counsel in the country, and they filed appeal after appeal, all of which were rejected. But that didn't stop Mr. Adegbile from claiming that Abu-Jamal was a victim of racism and a corrupt judicial system. For Mr. Adegbile, Abu-Jamal's case was apparently an opportunity to focus more on a political agenda than the case at hand. Abu-Jamal's guilt or innocence was not really the concern. Mr. President, Debo Adegbile is free to make any arguments he sees fit about the First and Second Amendment. He is free to turn the brutal murder of a police officer into a cause to advance a political agenda. But when he does so, I think it says something about his judgment and it says something about his fitness to lead the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Department of Justice and police forces around our country should be working together to ensure that minority rights are respected and that civil rights abuses are punished. This nominee would only make that work more difficult, in my view. That's because, as the Fraternal Order of Police wrote in a letter to President Obama, this is from the FOP, they said, if Mr. Adegbile is confirmed, it will serve to, and I quote, exacerbate growing division and distrust, end quote, between the Civil Rights Division, which is charged with securing our most basic freedoms, and the men and women of law enforcement who defend those freedoms by putting their lives on the line every day. I think we can and should do better with a nominee who can work with the Fraternal Order of Police and other law enforcement around the country in ensuring that our most basic freedoms are secured through the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. For these reasons, Mr. President, I pose the nomination of Mr. Adegbile to this position, and I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to do the same.